Hello, this is Emma Curver, and this is my response video for the Communications 320 Module 1 discussion. Starting with question 1, can I explain in my own words why storytelling is an important tool in business communication? Storytelling is an important tool in business communication because it connects us to something greater than ourselves. A good story can be inspiring. Employees might feel like an internal call to action that just like a request or a slogan might not generate. Many people are searching for more purpose or meaning in their work, and a story could inspire pride in your company's acts or a vision or their vision that makes your work feel more meaningful. A good story can also make a company feel more sympathetic or familiar to a consumer. Sorry, I have my notes over here that I'm referencing. Try not to script it out, but got my notes. I had been thinking about an example of a company that has a good, storyline, and I was thinking about like Dawn dish soap, where the BP oil spill was in 2010, but the ducks are still in every single commercial, because the story of Dawn dish soap helping rescue wildlife during oil spills generates a positive connotation with the public while also reinforcing their cuts through grease product slogan. So this story is twofold. It generates this positive public image, but it also reinforces the power of their product, which would incentivize people to buy it. And then a time that storytelling helped me communicate in my professional life. One example was when I had my very first job when I was 15 at a little sandwich shop. They used to tell us a story, or tell all the new hires a story of a time that a customer had come in right at close. This person, we close at 9, it's 8:59, this customer comes in. Instead of telling the customer that we were closed or we couldn't help them, they, gave service with a smile, gave them the same stellar experience they gave everyone else. And then, customer got their food, they left. But then later on, the client reached out to the owner to thank them for their employees' kind service. Turns out that they had been coming from the hospital where their spouse was not doing well, and just a good meal and a friendly word had just made them feel valued and cared for, and they gained a customer for life. And this story gets told to all the new hires there to communicate just that need for kindness and compassion, as well as, treating every client with that same high standard of service, regardless of whether it's convenient or not. So that was one example of a story being used to communicate that company's kind of values. And for the next question, I did question 6. How do I typically prepare for important meetings and conversations? At work, we have what we call scrubbing appointments. So ideally 24 to 48 hours before, or at least the morning of, I'll go through, review what the client is coming in for a meeting, look through the available information that I have for any potential opportunities, any possible issues that could arise. While I generally try to avoid making those conversations feel scripted or drafted out, I do have some, pre-prepared talking points that I can fall back on. If I feel unprepared or I lack knowledge on like the specific issue that this client is coming in for, or, I'm not necessarily the best person for their need, I prepare for these, meetings and conversations by making sure I engage other associates or partners who might specialize in that subject area. So just bringing in more people to this specific conversation, making sure that I'm communicating effectively by not just going in blind. In the text, they had referenced the role of the gatekeeper on page 20, and that's who chooses what information to include and what to leave out to make sure that the message remains clear to the receiver. Working with large cross-sections of the public, I find myself adopting that role pretty frequently and tailoring my conversations to the recipient. My conversations around credit are going to sound really different when I'm speaking to a newly 18-year-old who knows nothing about the credit building process than it does when I'm talking to a 30-year-old buying their first home, or, with a 60-year-old who, is looking into credit repair, debt assistance, etc. Next, I did question 7. When was a time that I adjusted my communication style to fit a particular context, and why was that adjustment important? Through my work, I have the opportunity pretty often to go out in the community and teach financial literacy classes. And this is just with members of the public. We serve a lot of different demographics, whether that's, schools, retirement homes, church groups, things like that. We just reach out to different organizations, and if they want to host us, we'll go teach. But we have slideshows that are based on concepts that are as simple as, the basics of a checking or savings, what is a want versus a need, budgeting basics, all the way up to buying a home or, owning and managing a small business. And even though I have access to these base materials, I usually have to tailor them based on the demographic that I'm presenting to. Elementary school students can understand a concept like a budget, but I'm not going to put that in terms of, cost benefit analysis of paying the mortgage or the light bill. It's going to be, with your allowance and your birthday money, do you want to get, roller skates or candy bar? It's like, what is more important to kids? Wants versus needs, delayed gratification, those really early things. With some other groups that we teach, we will go in and talk to intellectually incapacitated adults. Those conversations, while we might be presenting some similar materials, are more centered around their specific needs of, what does it look like if someone is taking advantage of you financially? Or, who is a trusted person that we can talk to if we think that we're the victim of a scam? And then on the other hand, if I'm going to a retirement home, there's some crossover with fraud and scam prevention, but there's a big focus on estate and legacy planning. These are people who are closer to the end of their life, and they know all of these basics already, or if they don't, they have other people helping manage their finances. And so it's the big conversations of, setting up financial power of attorney or planning for when they can't make their own financial decisions. But these adjustments are important, because even though the ultimate message of I want to help you and improve your financial health is the same, the delivery has to be different, or the message won't be heard, because it won't feel targeted and it'll just feel generic and unhelpful. All right. And then for the last question, I did question 4. What is active listening? And then why is it important in a business setting? So active listening, to my understanding, is listening not just with the intention to respond, but with the intention of really hearing and understanding the source's message. The receiver can indicate that they're listening through thoughtful engagement, such as, gestures, nodding along, asking insightful questions, giving, asking for clarification when needed, not just, nodding along because you're not really listening, or listening with the intention to just respond. active listening is important, especially in a business setting, because it helps avoid things like risk. When everyone is actively engaged in following a dialogue, too many people will just say yes to a manager's suggestion without having a full scope of what is happening or what they're taking accountability for, and that can really come back and bite you. Or it can cause, issues down the line when you're the person responsible for implementing what you agreed to and you didn't inherently understand it in the first place, because either you weren't listening actively to the instructions, the communication, the plan, or it wasn't clear in the first place and you didn't clarify. And then also with active listening, effective feedback can't be given unless the receiver was actively listening. If, the receiver isn't fully engaged or in tune with what, I was saying, how can they give me meaningful corrections or insight? And so that was what I had. Thank you.